Welcome back to week 2 of our Financial Foundations series. My name's Amy Masters. I'm one of the certified financial planners here at Korhorn Financial Group. Today we're going to talk about our 3 bank account system, which is a cash management tool, as well as just some basics to getting a budget started. If you're new to this series and you missed last week, go ahead. If you haven't already, I'd love for you to check out Mike Bernard's series on habits. So that was our week 1 start to our series. Check that out. If you already did, one of the assignments Mike kind of assigned as part of that series was to write down your financial goals. So if you did that, we'd love to hear from you. So if you want to put any of those in the comments below, we'd love to encourage you. We'd love to hear what it is that you're focused on. Like I said, today though, we're going to talk about 3 bank account system and the basics of getting a budget started. So I'm going to talk about that 3 bank account system idea. The idea of a 3 bank account system is really we have 3 types of bank accounts or 3 purposes to our bank accounts. This is not rocket science, this isn't anything crazy, but to be honest, this is probably one of the best things I've implemented in our own financial life. So having a way to be organized, making sure money's being set aside and prioritized to the right things has just been really key to us as we've made progress towards our financial goals. So this idea of 3 bank account system, we're going to start with our first bank account, which is for immediate spending. There's nothing crazy about this one. It's probably something you already have in place, but with immediate spending, this is just our checking account. So with a checking account, right, money goes in. So any direct deposits, any income that you have will be coming into the checking account. And then this is where you would pay your bills from, right? So rent, utilities, groceries, all of that would come out of our immediate spending checking account. So money goes in, money goes out. It's a revolving account. With your immediate spending, I encourage people to have a minimum amount in there that they kind of think of as zero, right? It's not zero, but maybe it's $500, maybe it's $1,000. It's some minimum amount that you keep in the back of your mind and think of it as zero. The reason for that, really 2 main reasons I can think of. First one is keeps us from, overspending in our checking account, right? Dipping too low where we actually are dealing with some charges, some overdraft fees. But also with checking accounts, building up too much money in your checking account, we don't really get rewarded for that. So checking account typically doesn't have a very high interest rate. So we're not getting a bunch of money back for having a bunch of money sitting in our checking account. But also, if you're anything like me, it can be a little tempting when you have extra money in your checking account. Or if it's not earmarked for something, it's just kind of sitting there, it's more tempting to spend it on something that you really don't care about. So having some minimum amount in that account at the beginning of each month kind of gives you some insight on, okay, it's the end of the month and I have a little extra in that account. Let's make sure they get deployed towards our goals or what is important to us. So with immediate spending, like I said, money comes in, money goes out. It's just this revolving account. We always want to stay above that minimum threshold we kind of determine in our checking account. Other than that, nothing too crazy. So after immediate spending, we're going to skip ahead. I'm going to talk about the 3rd bank account. We'll come back to number 2 here in a minute. But our 3rd account is our emergency fund. An emergency fund might not, again, be a new idea for you. Maybe it's new in implementation, but a lot of people are familiar with at least the idea of having an emergency fund. The whole purpose of having an emergency fund is, if you have an emergency, you have those dollars there to help you get through that. So some examples of emergency might be, a job loss, or it could be, the car repair, or just something you can't plan for. So emergency fund, the goal there is we have some resources that can get us through that emergency without needing to rely on going into debt, right? So we don't have to put it on our credit card. We don't have to take out a big loan to get us through our emergency. We have dollars already earmarked to help us get through that. With an emergency fund, a couple goals I'd want you to have in mind. So the first one is, if an emergency fund is brand new to you, I think having $1,000 as your starting goal is a great place to start. So if you're brand new, there's $0 in your emergency fund, and you wrote down your goals, and this one wasn't on it, maybe add it, of building up that emergency fund to $1,000. Once you've gotten there, the next step I'd want you to get to 3 to 6 months of your living expenses. And we're going to talk about living expenses and what that looks like in our second part of our series today when we talk about the budget. But once we know what a month of living expenses look like, it's easy for us to look and say, okay, what would 3 to 6 months look like? 3 to 6 months might also take you a really long time to build up to, but I just keep that in the back of your mind as a goal that you want to kind of be intentional about. So maybe it's something that you have a little bit of money going into each month, or more sporadically, whatever you need to do to, again, get it up to 1,000 and then work your way up to 3 to 6 months. Now for the emergency fund, I do have a couple rules when it comes to what type of account we'd use for that. So we wouldn't want to use a checking account for our emergency fund. Typically this is going to be either a savings account or a money market account. So my rules are, I want it to be free, so I don't want to pay for an emergency fund, right? I don't want to have a monthly expense or an annual expense. In most banks, there's some free options there. So I want it to be free. I want it to be liquid. So I want to be able to access it anytime I want. So I do know, or I've seen a lot of people where they'll have like a CD at the bank be their emergency fund. But with like a CD, it's locked up for a period of time, maybe 6 months or 12 months, or maybe even longer than that. And I just keep in mind the CD and your emergency might not coincide, right? So your emergency might happen today, but you might have 6 months left until you can access that CD money. So I don't want that. I want something that's liquid, you can have access to anytime you need. The other thing I want it to be safe, right? I don't want to take any risk with my emergency fund. I want to know it's there. That might be kind of the boring answer. Maybe there's opportunity to earn more money by investing it or doing something else with it. But because this is an emergency fund, I don't want to take any risk. I don't want it in the stock market. I don't want, again, I just don't want to even worry about it. So have it be free, have it be safe, have it be liquid. And then, there are some good interest rates out there. So you can find some higher yielding, again, money markets or savings accounts where you're going to get a little bit bigger reward than like a checking account on the interest you can accrue on your emergency fund. So we have our immediate spending, we have our emergency fund. Our third account is delayed spending. The idea of delayed spending isn't for expenses that happen every month. Again, that's our immediate spending. But these are for expenses that happen less frequently. Maybe they happen quarterly or annually, or maybe even less frequently than that. Maybe they're every couple of years. The idea of delayed spending is setting aside money for those types of expenses. I think the perfect example of a delayed spending account is Christmas. So Christmas happens the same day every year, right? December 25th, we know it's coming. But for a lot of people, if they haven't planned accordingly, it's easy to go into the new year with some credit card debt or some new debt that they weren't used to having, or maybe they've depleted their cash reserves too much because they weren't prepared for Christmas, even though we knew it was coming. So the idea of a delayed spending account is saying, okay, I know Christmas is coming. I have an idea of what I want to spend, on family members or friends or loved ones. What if I set aside money every month for when Christmas came along or when I was ready to do my shopping, right? Creating bite-sized pieces into my delayed spending gift account is a bit easier than coming up with a bunch of money all of a sudden in November to pay for Christmas. Now, the reason I put gifts down, for me personally, I use this account for Christmas, I use it for birthdays, I use it for weddings. I don't know about you guys. Tons of weddings the first couple of years after you graduate, and you might be traveling and there's wedding gifts. It can be pretty expensive. So again, setting aside money every month can be a little bit easier than knowing all the expenses are happening either in December or, all the birthdays in my family tend to be in the spring. So, being able to spread that out just makes it a little bit easier. A couple other examples. There's some fun examples and not so fun example. And a not so fun example would be insurance. So with your auto insurance or life insurance, most companies give you a discount if you pay less frequently. So if you pay, semi-annual on your car or annually on your life insurance, you actually might be paying less than somebody who would be paying for the exact same policy on a monthly basis, kind of giving you a break breakpoint for paying in less frequently. So the idea of having a delayed spending insurance account would be saying, okay, I know how much I'm going to spend on my insurances for the year. I'm going to set aside money monthly rather than paying my premium monthly. And then when that bill comes, I'm getting a bit of a discount and I'm just paying it out of this account because I already have the money earmarked. Gifts, insurance. My favorite account is a travel account. So with a travel account, it's something my husband and I love to do. It's really important to us. So we've said we want to make that a priority. And to do that, we need to make sure we're setting money aside for the different travel adventures that we want to have. So again, we set aside money monthly, and then we're able to take the trips. We're able to do the things that we want to do because we already have money earmarked for that goal. There are tons of other examples. These were just a couple that I threw up here. I've had people have engagement ring funds, or their first house, or if you're in 4-H, right? Maybe some of the animal costs. There are tons of different ideas for delayed spending accounts. Figure out which ones might be best for you. And again, start thinking about how much would I want to have set aside for each of these accounts. Something like insurance is going to be easier to set aside for than something that's going to be more variable. You know exactly what your insurance is going to be, or at least a rough idea. Something like travel maybe take some more consideration of, what trips do we want to take, or what do we want to plan for, to know how much to set aside each month. I think a good best practice for our delayed spending, again, there's kind of two ways you can do it, really up to you. For me personally, I actually have separate bank accounts for each of my delayed spending accounts. I'm a very visual person, so I log into my bank account and I'm easily able to see, okay, this is how much I have in my travel account. This is how much I have in my insurance account. So I like having the separate bank accounts. It just makes sense to me. I have there's other advisors, other clients, people who have implemented this where they just have one account for delayed spending as opposed to breaking it up into multiple ones. And then they keep track, right? So maybe on a spreadsheet or piece of paper, they kind of earmark what dollar amount in this account is earmarked for which delayed spending item. So again, figure out what might work best for you. If you're more visual like me, maybe having them broken up will be helpful. Keep in mind, some banks will limit how many accounts you can have with them. I've chosen to do like an online bank where I think you can have up to like 25 accounts. Don't do that. That's too overwhelming. But I think I have 8 accounts total between my emergency fund and my delayed spending that I'm setting aside money for these different types of expenses. Okay, so the second part of this session that we're going to talk about is the budget itself. So with a budget, my biggest encouragement to you is don't make any excuses, but figure out a system that works for you. I'm going to talk about some best practices here in a little bit, but I often hear people say to me, I started a budget, I didn't think I was doing it right, so I stopped. Or, I really didn't know how to get started, so I just never did, right? Don't let either of those excuses get in your way. Figure out a system that works for you. Find a way to make it continue to work, right? And that process might evolve for you as your life evolves, your maybe financial complexity changes, but find a system, make it a routine, and just make this a lifelong habit. I would say of a lot of the clients I work with, a lot of the people who are most successful, not successful in the sense that they have the biggest paycheck or they have the highest net worth, but most successful meaning they have the most financial freedom or financial happiness. They're ones that have done budgets and have continued to incorporate that into their life. So, this is a great start if you're just graduating, you're still in school, and you're trying to get some good financial habits in place. Getting a budget started and making that a habit is just so important. So with the budget itself, there's 2 pieces, and often the second piece gets missed. But the first piece of the budget is creating the budget itself. So that's looking at our actual expenses, that's looking at our categories or our spending type of expenses that we have. So, rent, utilities, groceries. So it's looking at, each of the expenses that we have and putting a dollar amount next to them of what we expect to spend or what, we know we're going to spend. So rent, we know what that's going to be each month. Groceries, something like that's going to be, variable. It's going to change from month to month, but we want to at least put a dollar amount as kind of an estimate of what we think we're going to spend that month. So the first part creating the actual budget of these are our expenses, this is what we're expecting to spend. The second piece, which again gets missed a lot, that second piece is all about the ongoing tracking. So we want to see, well, what are we actually spending, right? What was reality? If you say, I spend $200 a month in groceries, but then in reality you're spending $600 a month, but just really not doing us any favors, right? We need to know what we're actually spending to make sure the budget we create is in alignment with what reality is. Okay. So with the budget, that first piece, what I want you to do, that's kind of our immediate spending, the ins and outs, right? What our normal expenses look like. I want you to just grab like a piece of paper, a notebook, doesn't have to be anything fancy. I'd start by listing out all of your needs first. So needs are going to be things like your rent, your utilities, your transportation needs, groceries, right? Any of those things that you really have to have. You don't really get much of a say in, right? They're necessary for you to do your job. They're necessary for you to have a roof over your head. Start with the needs first. Once you have those listed out, list all of your wants. Wants are going to be, travel, entertainment, eating out, some things that, you have a lot more say in. It could be Netflix, it could be video games, whatever those expenses are, list out the wants next. Once you have all your needs and all your wants down, again, put a dollar amount next to each of those on what you're what you know you're going to spend or what you're expecting to spend. And let's make sure that, total income is either exceeds or gets you to perfectly zero after you have all those expenses in place. Now, in reality, it takes a while to get the budget right. So right now, if you do that, you might say, oh gosh, I'm in the red, right? I have more expenses than I have income. Start with the wants first, revisit each of those and say, where do I have some wiggle room? Where can I maybe cut back a little bit to get my budget balance to zero? If you already have some surplus, or again, as you're walking through each of the different expenses you have and you create some surplus, that's a great place to see, where should some of these delayed spending items fit in. Maybe that's some room that you can put towards paying off some debt. That's some money that can go towards retirement, right? Those are dollars that we need to make sure are getting incorporated in the budget. But it takes time to get all of these pieces in place. So first piece of our budget, creating the actual expenses for the month. That will also give us insight on this 3 to 6 months of the emergency fund. So once we know, well, this is what a typical month looks like, we know, okay, well, this should be kind of our goal for our emergency fund. The second piece of the budget then, like I said, is the ongoing tracking. So once you have your budget in place, you know what you want to spend each month or how you're expecting the money to be spent each month. Tracking your actual expenses is key to making sure the budget is, again, in alignment with reality. There's a couple different ways to track your actual expenses. For those of you who are really tech savvy and like looking at apps, there are tons of apps out there for budgeting. Some of the ones I've played around with or I've heard some good things about from different people I've talked to. Mint is a great one. There's You Need a Budget. There's Every Dollar. There's a handful of budgets out there. Each of them have pros and cons to them. Maybe check them out. And again, if you're an app person and think that route might be best for you for creating a budget and tracking your expenses, try them out. See which one you might work best for you. If you're not an app person, there's absolutely nothing wrong with creating an Excel spreadsheet, looking them up online. There's tons of Excel spreadsheets you can download. That just gives you a template to, again, have both aspects of that budget, your actual, what you're expecting to spend, and then the actual ongoing tracking for each month. There's also nothing wrong with just having a notebook that you write all this down by hand, right? I know a lot of people who do that too. So you're not tech savvy, even to the extent that you say, I don't want to do anything with Excel. There's nothing wrong with having a handwritten budget. Just do something, right? Whatever is going to work best for you, let you be successful in your budgeting. That's the route you need to go. So to be successful with the budget, we want to make this a habit. So something that's reoccurring, it's just become second nature. I've found people who look at this on a weekly basis are typically most successful in keeping this going as a long time habit. So maybe you set a reminder on your phone for every Tuesday at 8 p.m. where that's your time that you sit down, look at your budget and look at your expenses that you've had for the last week. see, make sure they go next to the right categories, and then start comparing them, right? So if this is the first week of June, you say, okay, maybe I ate out a little bit more than I should so far this month. I need to be extra intentional about that these next couple weeks to be on track for my June budget for eating out. Now, weekly, I think, is a great way because, one, it's not very overwhelming, right? You probably don't have a ton of transactions that have happened in a week, but it also gives you plenty of time to kind of redirect or change course if you need to on any of your categories. I've had a lot of people where they want to do it monthly. I think monthly is very overwhelming, right? You have a whole month's worth of transactions to put in your budget of what you actually spent, and you don't really have time to redirect, right? So if you said, oh, I'm just way over on these areas of my budget for June, yeah, you can be more intentional in July, but you've maybe had too much lag time. There's also, especially if you do an app, there are ways that you can make this a daily occurrence. So I use an app personally for our budget, and I do look at mine every day. When I look at it every day, I'm looking at it for like 60 seconds. So I'm not spending a lot of time. I'm just quickly looking at it. Same thing I talked about for the week. I just look at my transactions. If it's been a day, I don't have very many, and then just compare where I'm at in my month compared to what I've actually spent. So making this a routine, I think, is really key. And then again, what I said earlier as I was starting this area of budgeting, don't be too hard on yourself, right? Practice makes perfect. It's going to take a while to have these become a routine. So again, figure out what app or Excel or paper version of a budget's going to be most successful for you. Try out a couple different things and try to make it a habit. Again, schedule that in your phone calendar. Make it something that is going to remind you to be looking at your budget. Now, the 3 things I want hopefully to take away from this session today, kind of some to-dos, some homework as you're preparing for next week's session. First thing I want you to do, if this delayed spending idea seems beneficial to you, if you think that'd be something helpful for you as you're organizing your finances, I would encourage you to think through what types of categories or what types of delayed spending accounts would be most beneficial, right? So would a gift account be helpful? Would insurance be helpful? Would an engagement ring fund be helpful, right? Think through which ones might be helpful for you, which ones might not, and create that list to start thinking ahead of, how much would you want to earmark towards each of those goals, which is number 2. So number 2, once you've determined what categories you want to have, think about how much you'd want to set aside each month for each of those. Some of those are going to be easier than others, right? Insurance is going to be easy because that's a pretty set amount. You know what that's going to be. Something like travel or gifts, that's a little bit harder, might take a little bit more time to figure out, well, what trip do I want to take next year? Or what do I want to be planning for? That will help give some guidance on how much would go in there monthly. I also want you to think about how much you should have in your emergency fund. So once you have your budget built, knowing, okay, this is 1 month of expenses, what would 3 to 6 months look like, and set that goal for your emergency fund, how much you want to have set aside there. So first one, creating the actual accounts, like how much or what categories you want to have. Number 2 is how much you want to have going into these delayed spending and emergency fund accounts. And then the third one is that whole second part I talked about, the budget. So creating the budget and having that ongoing tracking. So stay tuned with us next week. Next week we're going to have our next session of our financial foundations. Mike Bernard will be back. So stay tuned and learn more with us.